Thank you for the gentle press of the play button as we get into another episode of the Leading Saints podcast. My name is Kurt Frankham, and I'm the host of this podcast. Now, if you're new here, let me give you the rundown. Leading Saints is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Latter-day Saints be better prepared to lead. We started as a blog in 2010, then developed into a podcast in 2014, then became a 501c3 nonprofit in 2016, and since then, we create various forms of content, like this podcast, where we talk about the cross-section of leadership and being a Latter-day Saint. So this episode that you're about to hear is a good example of the type of content we produce. As I've had opportunity to meet many people in this listening audience, one thing I've heard several times is that we are never afraid to talk about any specific topic. I hope that's the case because we recognize that church leaders don't always get to pick the conversation topics that they have with those they lead. So hopefully we can offer a model of how to discuss difficult topics on this podcast that will then in turn give you more confidence to step into whatever tough conversation finds you on your journey of leadership. Now in 2023, it is almost impossible for leaders to avoid conversations related to the LGBT community. Some prefer the acronym SSA for same-sex attraction. And let me quickly insert here that if you're looking for as many resources related to LGBT SSA Latter-day Saint experiences, I encourage you to consider two things. Check out our LGBT Saints virtual library, which you can listen to at no cost at leadingsaints.org/14. Also, check out the upcoming North Star Conference happening in June of 2023. It is a remarkable conference, and I'll be there. They have a free leadership track that is incredibly helpful, and I'll put the link to those details in the show notes. Now, back to this episode. I want to focus on the T in LGBT, which stands for transgender. For many leaders, including myself, it's easiest to simply avoid these conversations. They're too complex, too many opportunities to say the wrong thing. What if I'm too condoning? What if I'm not loving enough? What if I state the doctrine correctly or incorrectly? And what if they don't like my interpretation of such doctrine? It's just too much to consider. Believe me, I wrestled with recording this episode because of these thoughts and concerns. The episode you're about to hear is a conversation I had with a transgender friend of mine. Whomever you are, I warn you, you'll disagree with things said in this episode. Some of you may disagree with things that my guest says. Others will disagree with things that I say. However, this episode isn't about laying out the correct doctrine or stating truth or weighing the value of one opinion over the another. Believe me, that's way above my pay grade. And to be clear, at Leading Saints, we hold true and believe in all doctrines, policies, and prophetic revealed truth. What this episode is about comes down to one question. And that is, does every individual deserve to have a loving and respectful conversation with their church leader? Let me repeat that. Does every individual deserve to have a loving and respectful conversation with their church leader? Now let me expound on that question with a few more questions. No matter what decisions someone has made in their life, do they deserve a place to sit with us in the church pews on Sunday? No matter what name they were given at birth or the pronouns they request to be called today, should they have a ministering brother or sister visit them in their home? No matter what someone believes about who they are or the eternal nature of their gender, does everyone deserve to be understood? So with that said, let this episode stand as an imperfect example of how to simply sit with someone in their life experience and give them a listening ear. A simple conversation, and maybe even a hug. So here's my interview with my friend, Katherine Herrmann. Today, I'm with Katherine Herrmann. Welcome to the Leading Saints podcast, Katherine.
Hi, Kurt. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, this is, I'm excited for this discussion. We were just commenting before we hit record that we're both just interested how this podcast will go, and we're the ones in it. So here we go, right?
I know. Keep your arms and legs inside the right at all times. Because I don't know. This could go up like a rocket. I don't know.
Now, I feel like we've been friends for a few years. At least I've met you, 4 or 5 years ago through my just being involved with North Star and attending conferences there. And you've attended several North Star conferences. And for those not familiar, North Star is a nonprofit organization dedicated to building community amongst LGBT Latter-day Saints who are striving to keep their covenants. That's probably not the perfect explanation of North Star, but we'll go with it for now. You can go to northstarlds.org for all the details there. But you recently wrote a book, and you reached out to me a few months ago when it was published, and the book is called Translucent: How I Put Off My Natural Man and Discovered a Spiritual Woman. And this is your story, right, of being a transgender woman as a Latter-day Saint.
Yes, it is.
And there's so much to talk about that we'll get into. Now, I just want to, and I'll probably preface some of this in the introduction I record, but some people, I think, will look at a conversation like this, and sometimes there's this stigma that, like, even having a conversation with someone, a transgender man or woman like yourself, there's almost this overly too affirming or condoning uh, effort in that. And I think that's part of your story, right? There's been moments where you felt ignored, especially by church leaders, because they won't even have a conversation with you. Is that a fair description?
That's true. Most people don't know what to do in so many different senses of they're afraid to have a conversation, of they're afraid of saying the wrong thing that might be offensive.
Right.
Believe me, I've heard it all. You're not going to surprise me with anything you say or any of your questions.
Yeah.
And I've been dead named, I've been misgendered, but also you get a thing in the church of, well, what is their standing in the church?
Yeah.
And, can I talk to this sinner? And I don't agree with what they're doing, but how do I still love them or include them in things that are happening in the church? And it's really kind of new. And also, there's a lot of stuff, not only in the church, but a lot of stuff happening outside the church politically and socially and culturally around the world, and especially in the United States right now. And so, given that as a background, that the cultural understanding of what it means to be transgender has been changing and ebbing and flowing. And so, dealing with that also makes it difficult.
Yeah.
Of that. So, yeah, and we'll probably talk more about what happens in the church and what
exactly.
doesn't.
Yeah, especially, the transgender issue seems like it becomes, with each passing 6 months, in the political world or society, it becomes more and more of this hot topic. And the more of this sort of polarizing topic it becomes, as a church leader, many church leaders feel, I don't even want to go near that conversation. And unfortunately, the easiest path for church leaders, well-intentioned church leaders who we love and often sustain, is it's easier just to ignore the conversation. And unfortunately, that leads to a lot of hurt for someone like you who feels like, yeah, you're ignored, or my church leader or somebody won't even talk to me. So I hope this conversation, I don't have any clear agenda with this conversation other than to maybe model what a conversation may look like. I consider myself sort of the average of all church leaders. I've been in certain callings. I sort of know the dynamics, and a lot of these situations feel impossible to reconcile, but hopefully we can at least model what a simple conversation will look like. And I really believe that everybody, every Latter-day Saint who has a church leader, deserves to have an open and authentic conversation with their church leader.
Well, it doesn't get any more simple than me. So,
yeah. Well, Katherine, let's jump into your story a little bit. I want to touch on the high points, and obviously, I really, and I'll say up front, like, I really enjoyed your book. It was a page turner for me, just to hear, like, just to how you allowed the reader into your story, to observe it and understand the tricky dynamics that you face, to say the least, of growing up as a Latter-day Saint in a very Orthodox, faithful home. And so let's go into your story, and then I'll ask the tough questions, or the questions that will get me in trouble, or get you in trouble, or whatever. So we'll go for there.
We'll find out who gets in the most trouble out of
Yes, I
this.
love it.
Who
All
gets
right,
a call from their stake president this
that's right.
evening?
Love it. So, where does your story begin? Where were you born?
I was born in Los Angeles. I'm a California girl. Love the
Nice.
beach, the mountains, the malls, and Disneyland.
Uh-huh.
So
And pretty orthodox home, right? I mean, going
oh
to
yeah,
church, you did all the things.
yes, I have pioneer ancestors that crossed the plains in the Martin Willie Handcart Company. So yeah, a very LDS family going back generations.
Now,
So
now this even in the beginning of this are talking about being born as someone who's transgender. I think most you would say it's more comfortable to say you were assigned at birth male, where others may say you were born as a biological male, right? And I don't know, what is that more offensive to you, or like how do you jump into that dynamic?
oh, yes, I have this body which is really weird. Um, that I have a hard time identifying with. But yeah, you would most people would say, yeah, I have a male body.
Hmm.
I have fathered 7 children,
Hmm.
so
Right.
it apparently works.
Yeah.
Uh,
and and but nonetheless, I mean, however you put it, you were born a biological male, or with a male body, right?
yeah, yeah.
And then, so just growing up in the church, like, even because from what I understand, as I've talked to many other transgender individuals, it's not where, and somewhere along the line, the LGBT, uh, terms, or LGBT initials, whatever it is, grouped into transgender T with the LGB, but in reality, it's really quite a different experience, right?
It's a totally different experience. LGB only refers to your sexual orientation of which genders you're attracted to. And I'm attracted to females like
Hmm.
me. Well, maybe not like me, but but to other
Yeah.
females. And so I identify as lesbian and gay. Um, and so you have gay men who are attracted to other men. And so that's your sexual orientation of the LGB part. The T part is how you identify in gender. Now, trans means to cross over. So I've crossed over and I don't identify with my male assigned at birth identity. I identify as female. And that goes way back to a young age of I told my parents when I was 3 years old. And so that would have been around the late 60s. And transgender as a word hadn't even been formed until I believe 1972.
Hmm.
And so before that, they were using transsexual in other words, but transgender wasn't a word until 1972.
Yeah.
And so apparently that didn't go well. I don't remember anything of it. But other than I needed to hide it and bury it. And so I tried to grow up being that boy that my parents and society saw. But as the problem is that as puberty progresses, um, and the hormones start to change, you start getting those increase in testosterone, probably around 6 or 7 years old. Not a lot, but it starts. And so as puberty starts to start at that age, um, the more the testosterone grew in my system, the more the dysphoria grew.
Hmm. Yeah.
And the more your body is changing in ways that you don't want, it becomes worse.
Yeah. And now, gender dysphoria, that's like the clinical term that you'll often hear around transgender people, right? Maybe unpack what do you mean when you say gender dysphoria, and then how does it feel for you in your experience?
Oh my, that's the hardest thing is to how to explain
Yeah.
what it feels like. What it is that you just don't feel like you're in the right body. You don't identify with it. If you look in the mirror, you don't see yourself. You see somebody there and you recognize that it's your physical self there, but you totally just don't see yourself. It's not you looking back. It's this other thing looking back at you. And that's really kind of disturbing. And you want to do other things. As a trans girl, I wanted to be with the girls. I wanted to be doing the things the girls were doing, playing jump rope and jacks. And I wanted the long hair and to be wearing the dresses and doing all of those things that the other girls were doing. Unfortunately, I didn't have any sisters in my family. I just had an older brother. And so I didn't have access to any of those things. And I didn't dare go to my parents for something like that. Mm-hmm. And so all of that had to be squashed down and buried. But dealing with that, and the feeling of the dysphoria is the classic answer we usually hear is it feels like being car sick because your outside world is moving differently than your inside world. I don't get car sick, so I don't know that feeling.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah.
So how I tried to describe it as a feeling of, say you're going to an important interview or a date or that, and you spill spaghetti sauce onto the front of your shirt or blouse. Uh-huh. You can't change. And you've got to go, and you're just incredibly self-conscious, right? You're going, everybody's going to see this, they're going to see that, and I'm embarrassed.
They'll make judgment off of it, right? Like,
yeah,
oh, what a slob, or, like why didn't they change? Or, yeah.
Yeah, and so you just have that whole nagging feeling of, I want to change this. I wish I could get rid of this and change, but you can't do anything about it. Yeah. Now, while you're in your interview or you're doing things, you might have a great time and forget about it. Mm-hmm. You might forget that you have that stain that's been bothering you, and you might have a good time for a while, but then something will happen. You'll pass by a mirror or something, or you'll look down or something, and it'll come back to your attention, and you'll go, oh yeah, right. I really need to change that. This is bothering me. This is not what it's supposed to be. This is not how I'm supposed to look. And so that's how I experienced that gender dysphoria, was this constant nagging feeling that things needed to be different. Yeah. That this isn't how I'm supposed to be, that this isn't what I'm supposed to look like. And that nagging feeling just got worse and worse as puberty went, and it never goes away unless you're doing something to take your mind completely off, unless you can distract yourself. Yeah. But the other way you can medicate it, as it were, is by doing things that correct it. So when I would do girl things, like if I could get a hold of a skirt and wear that, then that would help with the feeling, because it would be normalizing myself. It would be moving me to where it wants me to be and telling me where I need to be. And so the more that you feed, probably not the right word, but the more you do to have that feminine energy, for me, of wearing makeup or wearing a dress or something, or being able to be in some way externally female and express that, then the gender dysphoria would go away or lightened.
And that gender dysphoria, from reading your experience and hearing others, it's like especially going through those teenage years and going through puberty, it's like that incongruency that you feel becomes more emboldened and sort of ramps up sort of this, the stress and anxiety, and the often manifesting in some mental health concerns that way. Is that a fair way to frame it?
Yeah. Well, in your teenage years, your testosterone is, spiking. It's huge, as every male in the audience knows. Your testosterone is off the charts. And so that is just making it worse as your testosterone levels grow.
So in those teenage years, were you, I mean, from your surrounding loved ones or ward or whatnot, did it just seem like, wow, Katherine seemed, obviously they didn't call you Katherine at that time. But nonetheless, but this Katherine is obviously appearing like as a troubled teen or having some extreme, like, did you come across as a very quiet teenager that seemed like they were, depressed, or what was your outside loved ones looking at, towards you experiencing? I don't know, horrible way to frame that, but there it is.
Probably yes, but probably not for this reason. I was a bit of a geek nerd. Of my father was into computers, and I discovered the Lord of the Rings in fifth grade.
Okay.
And so I got into fantasy. My brother got into science fiction, and my father got us a computer. And I was playing Dungeons and Dragons in 1980. So
Awesome.
I was a lot different than the other kids at that point in time, where all the guys were into basketball or wrestling
Yeah.
and sports and things. And that just, while I played soccer, which I loved, I was no good at basketball or baseball or football and those things. And so I had no ability to make friends with the other guys in my ward, and that because we just had none of the same interests. I'm like Dungeons and Dragons, and they're all like, "What?"
So you were those that sort of persona, that nerd persona of Lord of the Rings and Dungeons, right? You just sort of escaped to that, sort of like you were talking about. That could sort of distract you from this quote unquote, spaghetti stain on your shirt, right? You could cope with those types of
Yeah.
things.
I don't know that that was part of coping with the gender dysphoria, but it was just that's where my interests were.
Okay,
And so my interests were totally different from everybody else.
gotcha.
Today, kids all over the place are playing Dungeons and Dragons and
Yeah,
love Marvel and Star Wars and everything. And that was just not the norm back then during the 70s.
yeah, yeah.
And so, or even into the 80s. So, yeah, so I was always kind of an outsider, but also having this being transgender was also a problem because I didn't identify with the guys. I didn't want to be spending my time with the guys in the ward. I wanted to be spending my time with the girls, but it just wasn't an avenue available to me.
Hmm. Hmm.
I couldn't go to young women's, and the girls just saw me as this boy. And so they weren't including me in anything, and they never would think to include me in anything
Yeah,
of their girl things. And so it would be awkward. I mean, how could I ask to go hang out with the girls and that? Um, and how to explain it at that time is next to impossible because nobody had any idea about any of this.
yeah. So, speaking in a broader concept about transgender youth, because this is a really hot topic in April of 2023, as far as transition surgeries and things for youth, and there's laws, and it's being debated and whatnot. What, just from your perspective, and with hindsight of your own experience, I mean, how do you see all that debate?
Oh, it's a bit overwhelming at times. I I liken it to the the laws that were enacted against blacks 100 years ago. Um, and where could blacks go to the bathroom? What drinking fountains could they use? What hotels could they stay in? And those sort of civil rights laws and that were passed around in various states, um, uh, um, regulating the where our black citizens could go and what they could do. And so the Jim Crow laws. And so I liken these sort of laws that are happening today with transgender is very similar to those sorts of Jim Crow laws of they want to regulate, where I can go to the bathroom and things. It may not be as bad, but from my point of view, it feels that way
Hmm.
of um, of those sort of legal things.
Yeah.
I understand the intention behind it, and I think it's being brought on by a lot of bad actors in the transgender space and in the LGBT community of pushing on this. And, I believe women should have safe spaces. I don't want to endanger other women. I don't want men taking advantage of these things, and that totally. I'm there and down for all of that. But the question is then what are my rights
Hmm.
and what am I able to do?
Yeah.
And what does a trans girl can do? And the issue is that there's a difference between the trans kids and trans adults like myself. I obviously wasn't able to transition when I was a teen or prepubescent, but kids can do that now, and um, uh, and I'm fine with that. But I'm fine with it as long as they're actually transgender, because I think right now that there is a lot of kids that there is. I'm probably one of those few transgender people who will tell you that, yeah, I believe there's a social contagion. I believe that the vast majority of girls who are transitioning aren't transgender, that they are medicating their teenage angst and anxiety by trying to escape their femininity to some neutral stance where they don't have to deal with being a girl in today's society. And they are identifying as non binary or calling it transgender. And they are changing their appearance, and they are even sometimes doing medical transition of either hormones or surgery as part of that. And I think a lot of them are going to regret it.
Yeah.
And so I'm all for regulating those sorts of things to make sure that there's the gatekeeping in place to make sure that these kids are really transgender and that this is really going to help them. And so I'm for that.
Yeah. Because it seems like we just don't, just from my, I'm obviously very separated from, I'm not looking at this issue day in and day out or living it, like you are. And so, but it seems like we just don't know enough about this transgender experience, especially in those youth and teenage years. And it is concerning to, obviously it's difficult to be a teenager no matter what other dynamics you deal with. And so, like you said, sometimes there's these natural anxieties, and especially going through puberty and hormones and things that make life confusing and make feelings confusing. And so it is concerning to, have a parent who wants to be loving and supporting to their child, but gets it wrong and assumes transgender and then makes adjustments medically that can never be reversed.
Well, from the research I do of reading studies and that come to my attention and talking to people and that it's my okay. I'm not a doctor or a therapist.
Neither of us are. We're just talking,
I
Catherine and
I'm
I. Yeah.
I'm not any professional accredited person at all. I'm not even a Supreme Court nominee. So this is Catherine's opinion about this, and so that this is my understanding. Don't weaponize it, but my feeling and experience is if your kid is coming out in the ages somewhere around 11, 12, 13 years old and saying I'm transgender, they're probably not.
Hmm.
If your kid showed signs or told you like when they were 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, they probably are. Although there's a good chance that one of the studies I've read um, showed that those who said that they were transgender at an early age, like I did at 3, they will either grow out of it and be gay by age 9 or 10, or it will not desist and will not go away, and they are transgender.
Yeah.
So so it really depends. And my experience talking to parents of transgender kids, those that I feel really are, those parents knew at a young age what their child was at a young age of 3 or 4 or 5 years old. A lot of parents, when it comes out at that age, they don't believe it. They try to suppress it. But what they find is that after a year of therapy and fighting it and trying not to encourage it and everything, that when they start allowing some social transition, their child is much happier. And they finally get to full transition, and their kid is alive and thriving and happier than ever. And they know that it's the right thing. So I trust parents in these cases. And so to know. But as I said, there's a big difference between kids who come out as transgender when they're 5 years old or less, and then the kids who come out at 11 and 12 and say, oh, I feel this way. And especially if you find out they've been watching TikTok videos or on YouTube, and they're watching these gender sources where they're learning these things, and they start to question it and go, yeah, I don't feel like a boy. And maybe they're a little, the girls are a little butch, maybe they feel a little tomboy, but it doesn't mean that they're a boy. And so a lot of these videos and stuff kind of brainwash them to a point of where they start transferring those feelings and those anxieties of normal teenageness, and not necessarily feeling all that feminine, to being, oh, I must be a boy. And then they decide that they are. And what they also happens is they get the attention, because once they come out on their TikTok profile and say, I'm really a boy and I'm transgender, they get thousands of likes, and they get tens of thousands of followers, and they get this cheering squad that's saying, oh, you're doing great, do this, do this, do this, and it cheers them on. And so they end up going down this path.
Yeah.
And so I feel really bad for them, and I wish that wasn't happening. And I hope this craze would end. But the problem is I get caught in the middle of it.
Right.
Because how do you stop this this fad going on of stopping these kids from doing these things without impacting it for the kids that are? Historically, transgender has been about 3 in 1,000 people. But now it's, a couple percent of people identifying as non-binary or gender fluid and all of these other things, which have, in my view, unfortunately been put in with the transgender category, so that transgender is this umbrella term for all of this gender confusion, as President Oakes would probably call it. But and I frankly don't like it associated with me.
Yeah. So taking this to like a church leader context, obviously that's sort of the general topic of the podcast and those that are listening. This is where it gets tricky, because I would imagine if a family maybe has a son or daughter who's experiencing some of these incongruencies that you've articulated, and maybe they've invited the bishop or a church leader into this experience to help them figure out prayerfully where to, what direction to take. To me, it seems like there's just so many complexities, so many nuances of what is or isn't, or how to determine, if the individual is transgender, and then putting that up against the revealed doctrines, with the eternal nature of gender. To me, it wouldn't feel crazy for a bishop to really encourage that family, say, hey, whatever you do, let's not do anything too permanent in these teenage years. Let's let the child grow up and develop until they can, as a grown, mature adult, make these decisions for themselves. Is that like completely crazy from your perspective?
Yes and no. I mean, of course you don't want people to do something, some irreversible surgery or something, then
Right.
regret it.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the I was looking at regret rates a while ago. You know what, like, the regret rate is for a breast augmentation among cisgender women who
A
go
lot.
and get a boob job and then regret it? It's like 35% or something.
Oh, wow.
And those who get hip replacement, I mean, all these surgeries and even cosmetic surgeries have these really high regret rates of and that. But
Yeah.
but people do them and most are happy with it. And to some extent, they're reversible, I guess. But yeah, when you're talking about things with transgender of what is involved there, and I'll spare the audience the details of it. They can Google and watch the YouTube videos of that. But it's yeah, you don't want people doing that and then regretting it. But the problem is the overlap there, because that's when people who are transgender are going through their worst gender dysphoria, because it's when you've got the hormones and your body is changing. And the problem is your body is changing in ways you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is then a lot of those changes you're going through are also permanent and in a way irreversible. I'm 6'1" and slightly broad-shouldered.
Mm-hmm.
I can't change that.
Yeah.
There are these surgeries that you can do to try and correct these things, but it's much easier to prevent them from happening.
Mm-hmm.
And those are happening during puberty,
Mm-hmm.
during those ages. And so to be able to stop those and allow the body to not go through that natural maturation, and be able to do a course correction towards the gender they identify with, will give them a much better situation as an adult.
Yeah.
And so you can't put those. So what you're saying is, well, don't make this decision as a child, but at the same time, it's like, if you don't do it now, you can't. You're like, don't do something irreversible now. But we want you to do something that's irreversible. We're going to force you to go through this irreversible thing of our choice without letting you go through do something that's perhaps irreversible that you want, because you might regret it. And so that's where it's tricky.
Yeah.
You see the problem. You
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
make that
That's helpful.
decision.
Yeah. Because from our standpoint, it's easy to walk in there with a like, hey, let's not do anything irreversible. But from your standpoint, you're saying like, no, puberty is the irreversible thing, right? And so that's a helpful perspective to just understand, regardless of what I think or agree with, or and it is tricky just because the society that we live, like you said, the social media world of like, it's almost promoting or encouraging this type of transition to those that even aren't truly experiencing the transgender or the gender dysphoria.
Right. And so I will say, really, you don't have to have any surgeries before age 18, boys or girls.
It's all hormonal stuff that they would.
So all the things about surgery out there, it's not as common as people are saying it is. Does it happen? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But for trans girls, they aren't doing top surgery, and there's only been a few cases of bottom surgery before the age of 18. It doesn't happen, but usually if it does happen, it's happening at age 17. Yeah. Nobody is taking this 10-year-old or 8-year-old boy into a doctor and having bottom surgery. Mm-hmm. There's no way to do it at that age, and there's no reason to do it. And so, I suppose some crazy doctor could do it on a kid, at a boy at 10 years old, but it's just, I've never heard of it happening. Yeah. And so you get a lot of stuff in the news of, oh my gosh, they're transitioning these kids at age 8 and 10. And it's like, that doesn't mean they're having surgery at 8 or 10. Mm-hmm. that just means they've gone into these gender clinics or seen a gender doctor for treatment. But a bottom surgery for a trans girl is 99.99% of the time happening at age 18 or older.
Yeah.
And a fewer cases at 17. And for the trans boys, for those girls transitioning, they're not having bottom surgery of a hysterectomy either. But what is much more common is for them to have a double mastectomy sometimes at age 14 or 15. But the reality is they could put it off till they're 18 as well. So I don't think surgery has to happen before age 18 at all, and they can wait.
Yeah.
That's not an issue. The problem, as you said, is hormones, because the hormones is changing bodies in other ways. And so there's puberty blockers, which are used, and it's very controversial, and a lot of things are being said about how dangerous they are and everything. But the interesting thing is the trans community didn't come up with puberty blockers. They were invented in, I think, 1983, and were used for precocious puberty.
Let's pivot back to your story. So when it came to, you made it through those developmental years, and then, you felt that expectation to go on a mission, and what was that experience of making that decision like?
Oh, well, yeah, I was raised that I would always go on a mission like my father. And I guess I was fine with that. The problem was when the rubber hit the road of when I turned 19, I got through junior high and high school, but in my senior year, I got a little rebellious, and I started growing my hair out. And I started changing how I dressed. And I think a lot of people interpreted that as I was on drugs or some sort of rocker or hippie or something. And nobody thought girl.
Yeah.
And so
for you, this was a way for you to begin to cope with this incongruency, right? This dysphoria.
So it was a way of medicating the gender dysphoria. And so when I grew my hair out past my shoulders and I looked in the mirror, I was like, oh, I see myself. I can actually start to see myself. This is who I am. I can see me. And that is a liberating experience to have that sort of confirmation. And so by the time, and also post high school, I really became suicidal. And so by the time I hit 19, the bishop called me in call me on a mission and gave me the papers. I was like, sure. And I took them home and I started filling them out. Actually, it's even worse than that. I left his office, and it was right before sacrament meeting. I think he pulled me in in our ward. Sacrament meeting was the last meeting. And so he pulled me in the middle there during Sunday school. And so when I walked out of his office, started sacrament meeting, and I think it was testimony meeting. And I got up there to the podium and I said, I got these papers here. I'm going on a mission. And that was the last I was said about it, because I took them home and I started filling them out, and I got to this section about mental health. And it said, how often do you think about suicide? Never, rarely, often, or something. And I'm like, where's hourly? There's no hourly on this form here. And it was sort of like, if you do, then explain why. And I'm like, how do I explain that? And then the next question was something like, are there any other mental issues we should know about? And I'm like, oh, that I'm a girl? Oh, and how do I explain that? And so I didn't know how to answer those questions, and I didn't have anybody I could talk to. So I just shoved the application in, because I had this realization that there was no way. I mean, I knew what a missionary haircut looked like. And my mom, thankfully, never in my life gave me one of those. she always believed in the more of the Disney ideal of boys with a little bit longer hair than
Yeah.
the missionary thing. So, um,
And going on a mission, you knew that. I mean, even everything from the white shirt and tie. I mean, that was the uniform. I mean, it's extremely masculine, right?
right.
Every
And
part of it. Yeah.
I've never owned a suit.
Mm.
Well, not one that came with pants. Um, I hated becoming a deacon and having to wear the shirt and tie. That was something I was not looking forward to
Yeah.
as I was growing up. And I hated it while I was in the Aaronic priesthood. I hated every Sunday putting on that dress shirt and tie and going to church. It was not me. And so realizing that at that point in my life, my long hair was my coping mechanism.
Mhm.
It was how I could express myself of being a girl outwardly to people, and then maybe they didn't understand that. They thought I was just some hippie, but that was me being able to express that and be able to deal with the gender dysphoria. It was my medication.
Yeah.
And so going on a mission and having to and cutting my hair would be like going cold turkey. And I didn't know what would happen, and I wouldn't, without any coping mechanism at all. I just figured I'd kill myself wherever the Lord sent me,
Mm.
that I would be dead within a period of time.
Yeah. So was there a decision point, or did it just sort of fade away as if, let's just forget about this mission thing?
I just came to that realization that there was no way I could do it.
Yeah.
I mean, allow me to go in a dress and a skirt, and I would have gone out and preached the Lord's gospel to everybody, but I could not do it as male.
Yeah. Yeah. So and maybe this is another part, insert this topic that I think, I mean, many people think about it, but especially in a church leader's perspective of, suicide ideation. Obviously, that's a huge concern, and don't want anybody to feel suicidal. And so, the feeling is that some level of transition needs to happen, either socially or medically or whatnot, or this person's going to continue to struggle with suicide ideation, and we need to stop that at all costs. But I've also heard research, and correct me, you're much more read on this, that any even medical transition, intense transition for transgender individuals, that the suicide ideation doesn't really change or is affected by that. What would you say?
The research that I've seen shows that simply by using somebody's preferred pronouns and name cuts suicide ideation in half,
Mm.
drops it from like 54% to 27, 28%. And so, and being affirming can drop it even lower, even down below 10%, down to like
And
8%.
what do you mean by affirming? Because I think many people define that differently.
Um, that you treat them as someone like me as female.
Okay.
So not just use my name, Catherine, which is my legal name now. And
Hmm.
yeah, and using that, it's great. So it's really odd when I come across stuff with my dead name and of, oh yeah, that old person.
Yeah, and when you say dead name, if people aren't familiar, that's the name you were given at birth.
Yeah, the name my dad gave me at birth and blessed me with. He loves to remind me of that. Yeah, changing that really really hurt my dad.
Mm.
And so yeah, those sorts of things help with it. And a lot of the problem is that somebody comes out as transgender, they socially transition in that they're wearing the clothes and appearance of somebody of the gender they identify with. In my case, dressing female with wearing dresses and jewelry and makeup and that, as other women do, um, is very good to me. But when people go, "Oh, you're transgender," and they start shunning you, and people are like, "Well, we don't want you working here."
Hmm.
And transgender people lose their jobs,
Hmm.
and landlords throw them out of their apartments or places they're renting, and families shun them. And so when you come as transgender, you're in this unique position of you are feeling great. You're finally the dysphoria is probably largely gone, and you're feeling great, feeling better than you ever have in your life, but now everybody around you is treating you poorly, and you're getting this shunning, this ostracizing, and you get the loneliness because you lose friends, you lose family, you lose your job, you lose a place to live, and a lot of transgender people end up homeless. Your life really goes downhill like Job. You lose, a lot of transgender people lose everything. And when you've lost everything like that, suicide then becomes something you're looking at as an escape from that.
Yeah.
And the thing is there is that I read stuff from, the non-trans audience and stuff, and they're like, it's being transgender causing the suicidality. It can't be us. It can't be how we're treating them. It's not us. And I'm here to tell you, no. Really, a lot of it is how you treat us. And there are people who treat us really well, and there's people who don't treat us really well. And when you lose family and you lose your church, if you don't feel accepted at church anymore,
Yeah.
like you belong there, and you start wondering if God really accepts you anymore, I mean, your testimony really starts to get tested in these situations. And so it is a huge part of it.
Yeah. There's some give and take there, right? I mean, because obviously I don't think any church leader wants to see anybody struggle with suicidality, or be homeless or do those things. But there is a point where maybe they can be overly submissive to every request and thing. I mean, there's a give and take there, and that's why I want to really highlight these type of discussions, that you got to at least sit down with these transgender individuals as a church leader and at least talk it through. Like, what would be supportive for you? What are you looking for? Well, I can do this, but that request I can't really do. I mean, is that a fair dynamic that's going to happen?
Well, the question there at this point is, what is allowed by the church, and what's personal, and what's, what is the church?
Mm-hmm.
People have a lot, as individuals, have a lot of feelings and understanding of what transgender is. And as I've found out, a lot of people are like, I don't want that transgender thing anywhere near me.
Mm-hmm.
That's wrong. That's sick
Right.
and wrong. And you're mentally confused. You're sick. You need help. And I don't want you anywhere near my children. I don't even want you in my ward building. There are people, if you read my book, it's this thing of, we don't even want you in the ward building at all. And we don't want you near our kids. We don't want you near our youth and all of that. And, that's really hard. But there's transphobia, there's bigotry in that. And I'm sure some church leaders have those feelings. Now, I mean by church leaders, I mean worldwide, from, the lowest up and that. But they have those feelings, and it's a lot of that is because they've never met a transgender person. They've never had that conversation. They've never tried to understand what it is we're going through. They just know what they heard on talk radio, or they saw on their Twitter feed, or where they get their news. And not that a lot of that isn't true, but I don't agree with a lot of that stuff too. And I don't like the circus that there is in going on with transgender, and I don't agree with a lot of it. That's not who I am. But, and so bringing those biases in as a church leader is something that they need to evaluate. Because if you look at the actual policy in the handbook, it's very accommodating of the policy that they released right before the pandemic starts. So maybe most people aren't even aware of it. But it came out in February 2020 with the new online church general handbook. And, it says in the first paragraph that, being transgender is hard. They recognize it. And they recognize that it's hard for families. But then they go on and they say, transgender people should be shown the utmost compassion and Christ-like love. and that we're allowed to go to meetings on Sunday, any meetings we want to. I've had Elder Christofferson tell me himself that according to church policy, I'm allowed to go to any meetings that I identify with. And so I'm allowed to go to Eelief Society. And that's the policy of the church. But you have a lot of local leaders who are, I don't want this trans woman in the Eelief Society. Or there may be women in Eelief Society who are like, I don't want this trans woman in there with me. And so bishops will then say, sorry, you can't go. And then you're faced with this feeling of, oh, I know what the 5 foolish virgins feel like. Of, I'm stuck outside the door. I can't go into Eelief Society. I'm outside the door and I can't go in. And so you feel, I don't belong. They don't care about me. And it's like, do they still care about you? Probably. But when you can't go in and be with the rest of the saints and they tell you just go home, you don't belong here, that's really, really hard.
Yeah.
Of that feeling. And then you're like, I'm not a foolish virgin. I've got a testimony. I want to be in church. I want to worship. I believe in the prophets and Joseph Smith, Book of Mormon, temples, all of it. I mean, I'm a card-carrying Mormon, but it's like, there was that interesting time in my life where I could go to the temple after I transitioned, came out to my ward a little over 6 years ago. I could go to the temple, but I couldn't go in Eelief Society. That works on your brain a lot of like, I'm worthy to go to the temple, but I can't go into this Eelief Society room. I mean, and the church talks about that, the complete opposite of that. Our ward buildings, anybody can come. Everybody can come to a ward building on Sunday. It's the temples where, we draw a line of worthiness and who can enter in the temple. Those are our special places. For me, it was the complete opposite.
Yeah. And when you did attend the temple, you had to present or do the male experience, right?
I tried really hard.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's difficult that's a whole nother, discussion.
I did get, I did several times get told in the men's locker room that I was in the wrong one.
Oh yeah.
So I was like thinking to myself, yeah, I am, but I'm not going to.
They won't let me go over there.
Right. Well, I probably might have been able to, but I wasn't going to risk it because I didn't want to have that conversation. Yeah. I try to limit my awkward conversations with my priesthood leaders.
Yeah. So let's talk about this, with the whole Eelief Society, attending Eelief Society dynamic, because like you said, you've gotten it's been communicated that you're free to attend anywhere, but then there's just so many opinions involved. And this is where it just becomes an impossible church leader experience because they're not going to please everyone. And I mean, church leaders, they want to just make, let's just be happy and pleased to, get along here. Right. And so, I mean, what advice, just from your personal experience, would you give to a church leader who says, because I would find, if I was your bishop, I would just be like, great, if you want to attend Eelief Society, let's have you go there. But I know there'd probably be 10 emails or phone calls of people, hey, we don't want Katherine, and then it's like, what do I do? So how do you begin to approach that situation from your life experience?
That's a very good question. Because years ago when I was in a bishopric, I read the church handbook, and it starts out saying, I think it's even in the current church handbook, it says, these are the policies of the church and is a place for you to read and to begin to get inspiration of what you should do. And when I read that like 15 years ago, I was like, that is amazing. Because inspiration is always a place in this church of personal revelation, and especially to church leaders who have those mantles, which I probably safe to say I will never have in my life at this point. And so I respect that. And so what is the inspiration you're getting of what to do? I can't discount that. So it's hard to say what a bishop, in those cases of a bishop receiving revelation, is going to be the best place of that. But I also know that a lot of times revelation comes, it can be, based on our own ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so a bishop who feels like, yeah, she shouldn't go, maybe we'll get spiritual confirmation that she shouldn't go. I mean, so I would say as priesthood leaders, have a very open mind on this issue of recognize your own biases of what you think should happen and realize what is the policy of the church. If the policy of the church is that they can go, then what is your reason for not letting them go? And make sure that that is a real thing, because I've been in Eelief Societies and gone for several weeks and everything was great. But then I say something and they realize I'm transgender, and then the next week it's, you can't go anymore. We've now had some women are uncomfortable having you there now because they know I'm transgender. They didn't know the weeks before. And I've had some priesthood leaders tell me, yeah, you can't go. The policy comes from the first presidency. And I'm like, I know it doesn't. It's not the policy of the church, but church leaders will tell me that. Yeah, judge in Israel, you have to balance things. And I feel it's a lot like being in the Zoramites in the Book of Mormon, when Alma went to them and found the Zoramites, and yeah, they were doing crazy stuff with the Ramyampton and stuff, but the problem also was that they'd kicked out a whole bunch of the saints because they were poor and they didn't dress well enough. And I liken myself to them in a lot of ways, of feeling like the church is like, you're not good enough to be here. You're too poor. Your clothes are wrong. And we don't want you here because of that. And so I have to go worship someplace else. And that is hard. And the question there is like, the people in the Eelief Society or wherever are uncomfortable with me. Okay, so the quickest and easiest solution is to then make them comfortable is to remove me from the situation. Just tell me you can't go. You're not allowed here because these people are uncomfortable. But very rarely is it the case that a priesthood leader then goes to the people who are uncomfortable and says, find a way to get comfortable. She's a saint. She has a testimony. She also has a right to be here in church and commune with the saints. We have in the New Testament, as we're studying this year, Jesus' disciples go to him and say, hey, why are you hanging out with the publicans and the prostitutes? And these deplorable people, why are you with them? They're not good people. We don't like them. And what I'm finding is I'm the deplorable today. I think,
I'm so sorry.
You might, people would be saying today, perhaps, Jesus, why are you hanging out with the LGBT people? They're sinners. Look, they're having sex with people of their same gender. Look at them. They're dressing, as the opposite gender, and they're crazy and they're sinning and all that. Why are you hanging out with them? And what would his response be? And I'm not going to speak for Jesus, but just think about that, is how would he react today of where should people be? I had a bishop who told me, he wanted the ward to be, not be a country club for saints, but a hospital for sinners. But I think so many people want that country club.
Yeah.
They don't want the sinners with them. And I understand that. I mean, I have 7 kids. I want my kids to have great influences. I want them to have those great young women leaders. I want them to have great people to mentor them and give them great examples and good friends and all of that. And the problem is, what I experience is people are like, I don't want you around because I don't want your influence on them.
Hmm.
And people want to pull up the tares out of the wheat field. But Jesus responded in the New Testament of, no, leave the tares. I'll take care of them. You don't get to pull the tares out, because when you pull the tares out, you also pull the wheat out. And I was talking to somebody about this, and I'm like, yeah, it's really happening today. Of you get church members who are like, I don't want those LGBT people in my ward. I don't agree with it. I don't condone it. I don't like their influence. And they pull them out. But the problem is when you do that, you also pull up wheat, and we lose families who are attached to those LGBT kids or parents or whoever, or their neighbors or people. And we lose the wheat as well when we're pulling out those tares.
Yeah.
So there's a time to create Zion, and it's not now. And Jesus will take care of the cleansing and everything, but he told us in 3rd Nephi, don't kick anybody out. But that's the experience I experience all the time in the church, and other transgender members, a lot of them. Now, I know quite a few in their wards are having great experiences. They're thriving.
Yeah.
They have church leaders who let them go to Eelief Society and participate in all of those ways, and are very accommodating and that in with their transition as far as within church policy.
Yeah.
But there's other church leaders who aren't, who are deciding that they want to impose more restrictions than the policy defines.
Yeah. And, where my mind goes to, like, at the end of the day, again, these are impossible situations if we're striving to please everyone, right? And difficult decisions have to be made. And at the end of the day, I'll respect whatever decision a church leader makes and say, hey, man, like, maybe that's not what I would do, but I know you've wrestled with this. But I just feel like there has to be a wrestle in this where, yeah, maybe there's the 10 individuals in Eelief Society or Elders Quorum, if it's on the other side, who are totally against Katherine attending Eelief Society. Then at least have the conversation with those people and say, okay, what do we do? Do we cast her out? Do we say she can't come here? At some point, somebody's going to be offended and leave. And so how can we at least lean into this and see if we can make this work? Because it's just, we're not all going to agree on this, but the conversations, not just with the transgender individual, but with all that sort of are struggling with this, have the conversation as a leader. And I think that's going to get us to at least a place that we can move forward with, and in good conscience and with the Spirit.
It might be a similar situation to like callings.
Mm-hmm.
As a bishop, you receive inspiration about calling somebody to a position, but then you have to stand up at the podium on Sunday and say, we're calling so-and-so to this position, who sustains it and who doesn't. And, what happens if there's a bunch of people who go, no, I don't sustain that person in that calling for whatever reason. Now, I haven't really ever seen that in a ward, but I hear it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And, how do you deal with that of people sustaining those decisions and callings? I mean, I was told for years that I could have a calling. But then the stake president, my bishop, sat down with me one time and said, yeah, we've gone over this many times. We've eliminated all the callings you can't have because of gender. But looking at everything else, we can't find a calling that somebody wouldn't object to. And so because they could imagine that there would be somebody, or I don't know if it's the same person or a bunch of individuals or whatever, but because people would object to my calling, any calling, I mean, greeter, activities committee, I mean, choir. No, you don't want me in the choir, but that would bring up a totally different objections. But because there were people who would object to any calling I was given in the ward, they decided they couldn't give me anyone.
Mm.
And that feeling of going, I was always raised that callings came from God. And so that's where they came from. And so why would you object to a calling coming from God? And I was like, why won't my priesthood leaders lean on God and go, what calling can we give her out of all the ones that are available to her? What would let her be a part of this ward and be contributing in the ward? And it was like, yeah, we're not even going to go there because there'll be people who object.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't even take that step. And that to me was a hurtful thing, is that they wouldn't even take that step to find out if God had a calling for me. And because of other people's bigotry.
Yeah. And it goes on just the pile of rejection that you're already feeling, right? Just
Right.
one more thing.
Exactly. I mean, that's the weird thing about it is, people talk about, well, this is just a trial in my life and stuff. And it's like, yeah, we do go through a lot of trials. These end days are really hard. People lose jobs, people's health, people's relationships. I mean, just on and on and on things of people are going through, of the trials of their life. But for most people, they can find sanctuary at church. You've got priesthood leaders who will talk to you and give you a blessing, that you have visiting teachers and home teachers to help you and visit you and comfort you and help you with things you need. There's an infrastructure in place in the church of helping people as they go through trials. My case is the trials are coming from the church and the people. I don't have visiting teachers. I don't have home teachers. I don't have a calling. I don't have a Relief Society presidency or even an Elders Quorum presidency that cares about me. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, a bishopric who is completely uninvolved too in this whole experience. And so when you're, I have none of that support system to help me in this trial, because the trial is in a way with the church. And so that makes it really hard in my life.
Well, they say, Catherine, once a bishop, always a bishop. And I was ordained a bishop, and so I will be your bishop.
Oh, well, great. Thank you.
So you have a bishop that cares. And really, I mean that sincerely, of like, I am willing to sit down and read your book. I'm willing to have this conversation. I know I don't make all the best affirming decisions or perspectives, but hey, I'm willing to sit with you in this and listen and hear it out.
Well, in fairness, I'm a horrible, difficult person, so I really can't blame any of them.
Now, I want to ask, because obviously the human brain hates cognitive dissonance. And so we want to categorize cognitive dissonance until it goes away. And it's like, okay, we have cognitive harmony, right? Like, and with this, it's easy for me, for someone who, I can go weeks and months without thinking about the transgender issues or whatever it is. And so for me, it's easy to sort of put a label on all this of it's a mental health concern, it's a mental illness, or something's happening. And you sort of talked about that. Yeah, sometimes somebody is struggling with some level of mental illness, and they'll sort of categorize it as, oh, this is a transgender thing. I need to, move that direction of transitioning to address this. I mean, is it, because I think the stigma of mental health continues to decrease. At least I hope so. With depression, anxiety, or OCD, that more people are willing to say, yeah, I'm OCD. I'm okay with that. And I have to make adjustments in life and whatever. Is it fair to just say, transgender is just a mental illness concern that an individual struggles with, and in the afterlife and in the restoration of all things, it'll be worked out? What comes to mind when you hear that kind of categorizing?
Well, yeah, I've heard that a lot. And I would say in many cases, it's probably true. I talk a bit about this in my book of my reasoning on reasons for why transgender happens. And the fact of the matter is that this is a fallen world.
Mm-hmm.
And our bodies are not perfect. And any parent who's expecting a child is praying their brains out every day that their child is born with 10 toes, 10 fingers, and, normal. Because as a parent, you hear all the stories of all the things that can go wrong. And you're just hoping for a healthy baby in this, because there are thousands of things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that there are 26,000 genes in our DNA. And things go wrong with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they affect how the body develops. Of how what genitals are created in response to hormones. Hormones play a huge part in our development in utero, of how our brains are masculated and defeminized, and how all sorts of things. There's processes not only in the body forming, but also in the brain forming, through genetics and interaction with hormones, that there are things with the environment that can have an effect. There's epigenetics, that you can have the right genes, but through epigenetics, the gene can be changed. Um, and so it's a very, very complicated process. And the more I learn about it, the fact that males are born at all is a miracle. Because the default is for humans to develop as female. There's no intervention in development. Babies will all develop as female.
Yeah.
And so even if they have XY chromosomes, and so there's it's a very complicated process that we do not understand everything about. We only know what 4,000 of the 26,000 genes do.
Mm.
And we are learning more. We only fully sequenced the genome about 3-4 years ago. So think about that. We didn't even know what all the genes were until about 3-4 years ago.
Mm.
And we only know what about 4,000 of the 26,000 do. And so there are so many stories, and I talk about some of them in my book, of things happening in development. And the question in this world is, what does that mean spiritually with our Heavenly Father? Of what are we?
Mm-hmm.
Our genders are eternal, but how does that relate to our body? And I'll give a real world example here of, in one of my chapters, I talk about this trans boy that I met a couple of years ago and had a really special experience with. And they were transgender. They were assigned female at birth because they had a vagina, no penis at all, and they were identified as a girl. And growing up, they came through puberty to identify as a boy. And they were telling their parents they were a boy. And the parents understood and realized that their child really was a boy, even though they were assigned female at birth. So when I met them a couple of years ago, they were about 13 years old, and they were being treated horribly in their ward. The bishop wasn't going along with it, wasn't being helpful. They were being they were being misgendered. There were always problems about whether they could go to young women's camp, even though they were assigned female at birth. They didn't even want this boy to go to young women's. And they were having all sorts of difficult problems in the ward, and they were being bullied in school, and having a hard time. And I met with them a couple of years ago and had a really great experience. And because they were worried about getting a patriarchal blessing. You want to talk from a church leader thing, you probably don't think about that. But when you're transgender and you're faced with getting a patriarchal blessing, you are petrified what pronouns the patriarch is going to use. What are they going to say about you? But anyway, I talked with them about that because I'd gone through that experience. Well, with the Utah legislative actions earlier this year of anti-transgender legislation, this boy attempted suicide a couple months ago. And for reasons I don't totally understand, the mother did genetic testing. And she got the results a few weeks ago and told me about them. And here's the thing, is that as you're listening to this, you're going, okay, this girl just is mentally ill thinking she's a boy. She just needs to come and get some therapy and just really identify with her female body. She just needs to give up on this thing of being a boy and realize that, and, you know, and not do anything permanent, nothing irreversible. Don't do any of those things. And I understand that. But let me tell you the facts here. The genetic test came back and showed that this child had XY chromosomes.
Which are male chromosomes, right?
Right. Having the Y is supposed to be male. Right. So this trans boy actually has a Y chromosome, but no penis. And what they found was that there were a deletion of genes on the X chromosome, which caused the testosterone to have no effect. That the receptors for testosterone are turned off. And so in utero, the testosterone came and it did nothing. And so this child with XY chromosomes, which you would think would supposed to be developed into a boy, didn't, and end up with a vagina and a girl. But you're stuck there with like, okay, why do they think they're a boy? Well, you can say now and go, oh, well, of course they're a boy because they have a Y chromosome, just like Kurt does, I assume.
Yes, I do.
Well, I don't know. Do you actually know whether?
Well, I guess I don't. But man, there's a whole lot of testosterone coming out of me. So
anyway, we'll assume that you do. But it's like, yeah, of course they feel like a boy and are a boy because they have the Y chromosome, but they don't have a penis. What do you do now as a church leader?
Right.
You go, oh, I have this. Well, genetic testing says they're XY and a boy, but they don't have a penis. They have a vagina. Do I send them on scout camp?
Right. Yeah, that becomes very complicated.
It's very complicated. But what my point of this is that, not saying that every transgender person has these genetic issues, but the fact is that here you had a child who knew what their gender is from a very young age, but we don't know why. We haven't done the genetic testing. We're not able to peer into the brain to know what hormones did and the sexualization of the brain and all of that for whatever these reasons are. You can look at people and go, I can look at Kurt and assume that you have XY chromosomes and that you had testosterone and all of that. But in reality, you might not. You might not actually have a Y chromosome. There's all sorts of things that can happen in a spectrum of things. And now I'm not saying gender is a spectrum. And I'm not saying every transgender person has genetic issues, but a lot do. And there's a lot of intersex conditions. There's a lot of things going on that we don't really understand. But as a church, what we do understand is a spirit. That really what determines whether you feel like a man and I feel like a woman, in my opinion, is what eternal spirit do we each have, regardless of the body. I mean, if God can put a spirit into a body that is mentally handicapped, that has Down syndrome or a host of issues. There's thousands of issues, into bodies that are blind, into bodies that are deaf, into bodies that are missing limbs, of all of these physical impairments that perfectly healthy spirits can be born into. Why can't they also be born into bodies that have gender development issues? It's just another aspect of this terrestrial world and these bodies, and how we are being, I hate to say the word tested, but we all get these bodies, and some are better than others, and we all have to cope with them in this world with having these perfect spirits. And so my view is I'm here with a female spirit having this somewhat male experience. Why? I don't know. I don't have that answer, but I've gotten plenty of answers that I am female. And so why would God give me this, what appears to me a male body? I don't know. He's not explaining it, and it'll be one of my first questions on the other side.
Yeah. I'll be right there ready to hear the answer for sure.
Yeah, I expect to get to the other side and find I have the body that I've wanted. Pick your supermodel. And that's how I'll see my spirit. And I'll just go, wow, I had that male body, but now I can have my real body.
Yeah.
And a lot of you out there are probably going, no, that's not what you're going to happen. You're going to get on the other side and find that you have this male spirit, and why did you do all those things? And I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen, but if it does, I'll be surprised, but we'll roll with it and go, I did the best I could of staying on the covenant path, keeping my covenants. I had my family. I got married. I've sustained my leaders in the church. I've tried to do everything right that I possibly can in this world that my Heavenly Father wants me to do.
Yeah.
It's just like everybody else. I mean, just like you and everybody else who has all of these other issues. People who are blind, people who are deaf, people who are Black or Asian or whatever race, or gender. Everybody's got their things in life, and this just happens to be mine. And I'm trying to live my best life as a daughter of God.
Yeah. And I appreciate all that, because what I gather from it is this, again, our brains want to reconcile this and have a clear answer. And we have a strong tradition of truth and doctrine, and this is eternally true, and that's eternally true, and whatnot. But to just sort of take a deep breath in it all and say, you know what, I think there's a lot more complexity in all that's going on here. I appreciate that example you shared, that, oh yeah, now that we learned a little bit more, look closer. And again, not that every transgender situation is going to come down to a
deletion of genes.
Yeah, exactly. But just to realize, okay, this is complex. We're probably not going to understand everything going on, at least maybe not in this life, and to move forward. And so this maybe dovetails well into this concept of doctrine and what our prophets and apostles have said, family proclamation, that, the church's stance talks about, eternal gender, and that gender is talking about biological sex, right? And so
what you were assigned, as President Oaks has said, is what you were assigned at birth.
Right. And so, it's, how do you reconcile that, or how do you step into that complexity there?
Well, yeah, not to get that appointment with the state president and high council, but transgender people are pretty okay with the concept of our gender is eternal. And we would agree with that. The question is, is the gender I think I'm eternally the same as what you think it is? And the church says it aligns with what you were assigned at birth. Okay, as a policy of the church, of the proclamation, yeah, it's true for about 99.997% of people. I think my belief is that a lot of the things like policies in the church handbook and even the proclamation are great in the general broad sense of this is what is true, is that Kurt Francom was assigned male at birth and has a eternal male spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody would agree with that, including you.
Yes.
And your wife. Uh-huh. And that's great. And that's doctrine and policy. But the problem is the cases where that's not true. Is that there's a minority of things. I mean, there's a lot of things like in the proclamation about, the man's role is to be the provider and the protector, and the wife is to be the nourisher and to raise the children. And we have this sort of 1950s idea of gender roles of men and women. Now, in a ward as a bishop, you might have some families where the woman works, or the man stays home, or they both work, or maybe none of them work. I don't know. But you get all those different things. But it doesn't change the proclamation. The proclamation, to me, speaks to an ideal, to the general broad case of this is how things should be, and this is what's best. But you always are dealing with the fringe stuff on occasion of you have things that don't fit into that. Like I'm talking about this trans boy, of you try and pigeonhole him into the church doctrine and policy and saying, you're a girl, you need to be a girl, your spirit is eternally a girl. Oh, you have this Y chromosome and gene deletion. So what did God intend there? Mm-hmm. Did God intend that to have a boy spirit in this boy body, but something went wrong and they became a girl, so they have a boy spirit with this boy body? Or is there really a female spirit in this female appearing body that could have become male but didn't, and so they're really a girl supposed to be having the female experience, but because of issues they feel like a boy? I mean, playing 10-dimensional chess with God of what did he intend in these situations. And the church has always recognized intersex conditions. And so I've met several individuals who were born intersex in that they had ambiguous genitalia, meaning that their genitals of a penis or vagina was not very clear of whether they were male or female, or maybe they had both. But there was an outward appearance that there was a problem. And as they grow up, they didn't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. The doctors looked at the ambiguous genitalia and went, you're male or you're female. But as the person grew up, it was wrong. They didn't identify with that assigned gender that they received. And they are able to send a petition to the First Presidency's office and say, here's my proof that I was born intersex. This is my intersex condition, and I do not identify as the gender I was assigned at birth. And the First Presidency takes up that petition. They do what they do, and they either grant the petition or they deny it. Mm-hmm. Most of the people I've talked to, it's been granted. I have heard that of somebody who their petition was denied. Well, I don't know the reasons. Yeah. It's the First Presidency. I don't know what policies they have. I don't, and if anybody's going to get inspiration and revelation from God, it's going to be them. Right. Right. So, I mean, it's totally in their hands and it's their thing. And, and I won't even discount the fact that maybe somebody really does have a girl spirit in a boy body and petitions the First Presidency, and the president, and they go to the God, and God says, no, leave them male for now. Mm-hmm. We're not going to change their gender marker. They need to go through the rest of life having that male gender marker because reasons, whatever they are, God in his perfect plan for this individual does not want their gender marker changed. Yeah. But maybe it could be, but he doesn't want it. it's that 10-dimensional chess of you don't know, and so without revelation and inspiration to know, but even then you don't, as I said in my book with President Oakes, it's like God doesn't always share the reasons behind everything he tells you. So, but by the sheer fact that the first presidency does change gender markers, it does mean that even when President Oakes says you have an eternal spirit and it's against what you were assigned at birth, the church has policy that they will change your gender different from what you were assigned at birth. So it does mean that there are exceptions, but in a general sense, what the church's doctrine and policy is true. But there are a certain number of exceptions. How many? I don't know.
Yeah.
Am I an exception? I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I can take that as some comfort of going, it's mostly true. It may not be true in my case.
Yeah. And just hearing you articulate that just helps me get a better understanding. Again, not that I agree with every last word that Katherine just said, but it's like, okay, I can see how you reconcile all that and are able to say, yeah, and I'm still a believer, and this, there's probably more that we need to understand. I think by the time I get to the other side of mortality, and if God comes to me and says, no, actually Katherine really did have a spirit of a woman, and I'd be like, oh great, well I just hope that I treated her well, in mortality, and that I was a good person and reached out and was Christ-like to her. And I'm sure maybe you'll get other side and say, no, Katherine, actually you were always a male spirit. And he's like, okay, well where do we go from here? Like
I'm gonna be like, darn, I'm disappointed here. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting first few seconds after I get through the other side. It's going to be probably another gender dysphoria thing of
like the other way, right?
Yeah, going the other way of going, what is the real situation here? Yeah, it's going to be entertaining. That's one of the fun things of being transgender is just the sheer entertainment value of it in your life.
I'm glad you frame it that way. I don't know. Is that
as if living in the end times wasn't entertaining enough.
Uh-huh.
Be transgender in the end times. I mean, your life is never boring.
Yeah. So I feel like I try to use sort of your own personal timeline and life experience as sort of the structure of this interview, but I've totally failed on that. But nonetheless, there's one point I want to get to as far as some things you've done in the last few years of attending different awards and whatnot. But I want to fill in the gap, and obviously they should go read your book if they want the full story, right?
Yes, please go read my book, please, all of you.
And it's available on Amazon, right? It's on Kindle. That's how I read it. It's available. But so you don't go on a mission. You do get married, and your wife was somewhat familiar with what you were experiencing, just going through dating, and right.
Well, yeah, mine is not the usual case where we got married and then 15, 20 years into the marriage, I said, hey, guess what? No, I came out to her 6 months after we started dating, and she dumped me. And her father said to her, sometimes girl spirits end up in boy bodies, and you don't want to marry, let alone date anybody like that. But for whatever reasons, maybe she can write a book. And
she's on next week, Katherine, just so you know.
Oh, good. Yeah, I have some questions.
Yeah, I bet.
And but she fell in love with me, and 6 months, and we dated for 6 years.
Wow.
Well, if you call it dating. But yeah, we were together exclusive for 6 years before she asked me to marry her.
Oh, okay. And you're married in the temple?
Yes, Salt Lake Temple.
Had 6 kids, right?
7.
7, okay.
Nice. I have 6 daughters.
And during that time, I mean, you were presenting male. Is that fair to say?
Male-ish.
Male-ish, okay.
Well, all that time dating, I had long hair, and I grew up my fingernails, and for a large part of it, I was wearing exclusively female clothes.
Primarily at
Even
home, right? Or
no,
oh,
going
okay,
to work.
okay.
Oh yeah, I even underwear. Yeah, I was going to work. It was fairly androgynous, but yeah, I my sweaters had shoulder pads,
Mhm.
and it was the 80s, and I didn't wear jewelry or makeup, but my shoes were women's loafers, and my pants, all my clothes were from the women's side of the aisle.
And generally, those surrounding you just sort of thought you had an interesting style for a male.
Right. But when I got home from work, uh, uh, I had clothes at her apartment, and I would change, and we would go out. And sometimes we'd go out to dinner or a movie or to the local Blockbuster. Some of you might have to Google that. Um, and um, and we went shopping for clothes and stuff. And so I'm 6'1", so I have a long torso. So she made some dresses for me,
Mhm.
um, to better fit.
That was just life. That was life for a while, and it was just it didn't wasn't really the topic of discussion a lot. It's just sort of how life was, right?
It's how life was. I would say she didn't really understand it,
Hmm.
but she was supportive of it.
Uh-huh.
And so that went on for years.
And you were classified like as a worthy priesthood holder with
Yeah.
callings, many times priesthood callings.
Well, nothing more than secretary. I
Okay.
explained this in my book. I've
Uh-huh.
never been nothing more than a secretary or a teacher. Nobody was crazy enough
Okay.
to
But
actually put me into leadership.
you were the executive secretary, right?
Yeah, I was the
Okay.
word executive secretary.
No, we need to have a whole episode on your approach to anyways, but
I was, well, let me just say, I listened to your podcast a while ago about being a elders quorum secretary, and
uh-huh.
I was an elders quorum secretary twice. And I also did a number of years as an elders quorum teacher.
Uh-huh.
But I I the only good thing about me being secretary were my legs. I I
That's a solid Catherine joke. Only Catherine
uh,
would make that joke, and that's why we love you. So
I did not take notes of meetings. I did not make phone calls and appointments. I hated calling people and setting up appointments because they would always not show up. What I was really good at was at creating reports. And as a ward executive secretary, I had the best report in the entire state. I mean, this was PowerPoint perfect of reporting for my bishop to the state president. The state president was in awe. That I did good. The rest of it, I was not good at.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
So you raised the kids, and then it got to a point where you wanted to present more as a female, right? And then that sort of started beginning of the end.
well, a few years after we got married, my wife came to me and told me that she didn't want the girls growing up thinking they had two mothers.
Hmm.
And so I had to go into the closet. So I spent about 10 years with my wife and girlfriend, expressing myself as female.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was something that was not discussed before we got married about what about kids? What do we do when we have kids? What would this look like? It was never a discussion. It was a really important discussion that probably we should have had, but we didn't. And so this was a surprise to me into our marriage that it's backwards. Instead of me coming out and saying, hey, I'm transgender and a woman, it was, hey, you've got to put that woman part into the closet
Hmm.
and present male. And so it was a backwards experience for me. And so I went into the closet for about 15 years, and I couldn't take it anymore. I would sit in church and look at the men on the stand and go, I don't want to be like them.
Hmm.
That's not me. I mean, and I don't identify with that. And so about 10 years ago, came to my wife and said, I can't be in the closet anymore. It's killing me, and I need to retransition.
Yeah.
And
And
then that's when things went to worse.
yeah, and since then that marriage has ended, right? And you're now single.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And some people may have seen you, or you've been on the news and whatnot in regards to what you do at General Conference, right? Maybe explain
Yes.
that.
Oh, well, there's a whole chapter in the book about this,
Yeah.
but yeah, about 5 years ago, I joined Peter Mosman in going to General Conference and having a sign that says, hug a transgender Latter-day Saint.
Yeah, and you just stand out there right outside the conference center, right, and take some hugs.
Stand outside the conference center there on the southeast corner where all the church leaders go in and out and give hugs. And I've been doing that for 5 years. And the first time I did it, I just had the most amazing miracle happen. And you can, anyway, we won't discuss it here, but yeah, it was really
Yeah.
affirming to me of that God would find me there at conference, and it changed my life.
Yeah. And that's what another point of your book that I really appreciate, and it's sort of the overarching theme of that, just how God has shown up for you in your story, in your journey, and that's just this feeling of grace that came from it. I just really appreciated that.
Yeah. I just did that in April. Peter and the rest of them have stopped going to give hugs, so it's just me.
We need another hug team, folks.
I know I've tried to recruit people, but nobody wants to come do it. But this last April, I was there and I handed out 200 copies of my book.
Oh, awesome.
And Emily Bell Freeman came out of the session where she was announced to be the new young women's leader. And she saw me and she came over and said hi. And I congratulated her on her new calling. And she congratulated me on my book. And she took a copy of my book.
Oh, cool.
And so, yeah, various 70s general authorities, mission presidents, temple presidents, people from presidencies and boards and stuff, a lot of them took my book, and I'm just dying to hear from any of them.
Yeah.
I know they're all slow readers and they're very busy. They probably have people to read it for them. But
now, I don't know what your plan is with that sign someday, but to me it's an icon. So don't ever throw it away. All right.
I was hinting to people that it might be my last time, and it really might be. And I had all these people going, no, you can't. Hugging you each time is a thing now.
Yeah.
And we look forward. So many of these church leaders will tell me, see you next time. We're glad you're here. And they love to hear my voice welcoming them to conference. And that it's been a really great experience.
That's cool. That's awesome. Now, and this, I mentioned bringing this up earlier, but we've talked about President Oaks a little bit, and oftentimes, he's a very straight talker. He's covers some difficult topics, and he gets sometimes a lot of hate online because he's that guy. But you mentioned in the book that he's actually one of your favorite apostles.
Yes, he has been for a very long time. I really look forward to the Oaks talks in conference. The LGBT pop community is not a huge fan of his, but I really love President Oaks and his shoot straighting style, and he doesn't mess around, and I would love to have lunch with him sometime. And I'm not sure how that would go, but I look forward to his talks, and I quote for him extensively in my book because he said a lot of really great things. And I'm the person in the LGBT community who, when Oak says something, they're all setting their hair on fire, and I'm like going, what did he say wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, he's just telling what the church policy and doctrine is. And as I've said earlier, as we talked about these things about how I deal with church doctrine and policy, it's like, yeah, I deal with it. I have a way of dealing with it in my life. So, he says things, and I actually agree a lot with what he says. I mean, one of the interesting things he said several years ago, and I was hugging and I was sitting in the tabernacle, was, it was the women's session. And I was sitting in the women's session, and when he was talking about, we can't be associated with groups who would take us off the covenant path. And I'm like, yeah, you can't. And that's one of the challenges of being an LGBT saint, is that there are LGBT LDS organizations out there to support you and that. But so many of them are so affirming and go down that road that they become anti-church.
Hmm.
And they believe things, and they take you down a road, as I talk about in my book, about Mormon Protestantism and things. And I see people leave the covenant path and leave the church, and which is, why I've been affiliated with North Star for the last over 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the organization. And so
Yeah.
it's a really great church affirming organization, but also supportive of LGBT people. And so that's something I want in my life, is things that keep me on the covenant path and aren't murmuring against church leaders.
Yeah.
I have no tolerance for that. Of when I'm in a group and they start murmuring against church leaders, I'm out.
Yeah.
And because I don't want that poisoning me.
Yeah. So you said earlier just the power that affirming an individual can have on, especially for a transgender individual. But can someone be too affirming? I mean, is there sort of a balance there?
Well, I think that's where people would get into what is something. Where does affirming become condoning?
Yeah.
And in my book, I talk. Elder Holland spoke about this. You don't hear about it because he was speaking at BYU and he said some other things which just set the whole world on fire
Mm-hmm.
with the LGBT audience, and but which I don't agree with, of how they respond to it. I understand what he was saying,
Right. Right.
because I always start from the point of view that there are prophets, seers, and revelators.
Mm-hmm.
And so I agree with what Elder Holland said. And but there was this neat little nugget in there where he said something to the effect of, we should be loving and affirming to the point that, they think we're condoning, and we need to be orthodox to the point that they don't feel that we hate them. And that really resonated with me, of people are afraid, and it gets back to where we started at the beginning, of people are afraid how to deal with me because they're afraid of condoning. You don't condone sin. Okay, what sin am I committing here?
Hmm.
I mean, okay, somehow my outfits are really horrible, but and I repent. But what is condoning? Of a transgender person. I don't want to condone that sin. Well, what's the sin? If, according to church policy, I can socially transition and I can take the sacrament, I can go to church, I can talk, I can bear my testimony, I can hold a calling. And as a former bishop, that that's well above the place of disfellowshipment.
Right.
That's way above being or being on probation.
Mm-hmm.
That is it. Are there some restrictions? Yeah, I can't go to the temple, but I'm still temple worthy. I keep my covenants and everything. I wear my garments every day and night. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm keeping my covenant. So it's, what is the sin? Well, it's a little vaguish there, but I like to attribute it to, I equate it to, in our church history, that there was a period of time at the very beginning when blacks held the priesthood and could go to the temple. And then there was a period of time where it was decided, no, blacks can't go to the temple and can't hold the priesthood. And then a very long time later, it was decided, okay, blacks can go to the priesthood, can hold the priesthood and go to the temple. And it's not that blacks were sinning. There was, that's a whole other podcast.
That's right.
But there were reasons and things happened, but that was the policy. And so I feel right now like, okay, I'm temple worthy. I feel like I should be able to go to the temple, but I can't because of church policy. Now we could argue doctrine and whatever, and of what that I'm committing some sin and being transgender and pretending to be female and all of that. And it's like, okay, but I don't feel any condemnation from God or a need to repent. And I don't, in that, I don't know what I would repent of. And so I feel all that normalness. So it's like, what is my sin? And that you are condoning. And, and so people are in this thing of like, well, I don't want to condone it by using your preferred pronouns or using your name. That's not truth. We believe in truth, and that's not truth. You're not really female, so I don't want to use your pronouns, because that would be good condoning or accepting what you're doing. Or I ran into this with my family. They will not buy me girl gifts. If I have a birthday or Christmas or whatever, I don't get jewelry. I don't get clothes or makeup or anything girl related. I don't get, because they don't want to condone what I'm doing. And so we don't want to condone sin, but what does that mean of what would be condoning with a transgender person? And the church really hasn't spoken to that per se. But Elder Holland in this talk says, we should affirm up to the point of condoning. And so that they feel like we're condoning when we're really not. And it's like, I would love that. I would love if people were kind and loving to me, that I really felt like they totally accepted and affirmed me, but they didn't. Mm-hmm. And I have that line with my gay friends. The church has a policy of no gay marriage or same-sex relationships and that. And I have a lot of friends who are in same-sex relationships or even married. And it's like, I can go out to dinner with them. I can go to their wedding. I've gone to the reception. Do I approve of same-sex marriage? No. That's not the policy of the church, and that's what God is not accepting. But, we all have those people in our lives. We have people who break the word of wisdom. We have people in our lives who break chastity laws. People who don't pay their tithing. We have people who are sinners in our lives all the time. In fact, we're all sinners at some level. And, what are we condoning? Where are the lines of where we are condoning with other people? Of, okay, I might not buy cigarettes for somebody who's a smoker. But on the other hand, it's sort of like, if they needed me to get them some cigarettes or something, would I not do it? Mm-hmm. I mean, is that condoning them doing it? It's just, what does it really mean to condone various things of where does charity and love end, and it becomes bad because we are condoning that and approving it? I can say, I don't approve of you smoking, but if you need a pack of cigarettes because you're having a fit, maybe I can buy you one, because it's being helpful and charitable or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not stating that out there as an absolute or something, but
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But just as at the concept there of where does love and charity end? How far does love and charity go with people that we view as sinners before it becomes condoning? And, the church has done a very good job of preaching what it means to keep the Sabbath day holy. And what activities can you do on a Sunday that are approved and which are unapproved, as it were? Don't visit stores. Don't go shopping on Sunday. do family things, visit the poor, visit family, visit the sick, and, rest. A lot of people love that because they take naps. But, and we know the things, you're supposed to not do that would be seen as not keeping it holy. But we don't really get the examples of what does it mean to condone somebody who's gay? What does it mean to condone somebody who's transgender?
Yeah.
Where do we draw those lines, and are they the same for everybody? And so I find in my life that people are afraid of being, well, I actually give a really great example in my book of somebody close to me who was like, I can't do any of this for you because that would be condoning, and I do not want to show up at the judgment bar and be held accountable that I condoned your behavior of being transgender and being a woman. And so they don't do anything, and because they're afraid of that. And I think there's a part with a lot of saints of like, I don't want to be seen as condoning sin. We're not supposed to. But where is that line, as Elder Holland said? But on the flip side of what Elder Holland said was, be orthodox up to the point where you're not hurting and they still think you love them. And we get a lot. And what I find a lot is that I find people in life who are more than willing to cross that line. They will preach doctrine to me. They will preach the proclamation of the family to me, and scriptures and all of that, and tell me what I'm doing in my life is wrong, and be hurtful. They're more than willing to cross that line of preaching truth to me, because that's how they show love. That's the right way to show love to me, is to preach this truth to me on that. But they won't. So they'll cross that, easily cross that line. But the other line of showing love and compassion to the point of, I think they're condoning, they won't go near it.
Yeah.
And so and Elder Holland in another talk talked about how that whole condoning thing is becoming troublesome, because so many people are LGBT today that it's like, you've got friends who are gay or trans. How do you interact and have a friendship with them that's not condoning? And he doesn't explain it. It'd be really nice sometime for them to, maybe give a little bit more clarification on that, of some examples, because I think a lot of people won't go to that gay marriage because they don't want to be seen as condoning the gay marriage. But lots of saints do. Lots of people don't want to do things with transgender people because they don't want to seem condoning. But what is and what isn't, it'd be great.
Well, Katherine, this has been a fascinating discussion. And so what if people do want to check out the book, where would you send them?
Go to Amazon, because I haven't gotten it into Deseret Book yet.
Nice.
But I talk in there about my experiences of being called to go to 40 different wards in 3 years. That was an interesting thing God wanted me to do. I talk in there about going to BYU's women's conference and going to Time Out for Women, and my experiences there of God in my life. I talk about my new life as a single female in the church.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of stories there. Yep.
That's posed some interesting dilemmas for church leaders as well, which we haven't gotten to talk to. But how do you deal with a transgender woman who's going to the firesides and activities and dances in a church dating situation? And what they've decided to do with me in that has also been enlightening. And so as I try and date within the church of finding someone who will love me and marry me, and that. So what I've found is, getting back to the opening question about how what to do with us, and that is of people don't think that I have a testimony that I'm just a sinner, that I've given my life over to Satan and he's running rampant, and I'm the prodigal daughter who's sowing her oats and living in with the pigs and stuff and waiting for me to get over this and come home. And how could I ever have Jesus in my life? How could I ever have the Spirit in my life? And the thing that I think the whole point of the book is of when God told me to write it a year ago, is to get out that message that that's not what's happening. Of what you think is happening with transgender people is not what's happening. Of we do have spiritual experiences. We do have God in our life. And I can tell you that God has been more in my life, and I have had more spiritual experiences and more powerful spiritual experiences in my last 4 years of being banned from going to the temple than I ever had in 40 years being male and going to the temple. My testimony has grown exponentially. I am more sure today of the existence of my Savior than ever, and the truthfulness of the church. And I have God in my life every day. And for people to think that I'm a deplorable and that I don't belong in church and that I need to repent and come uh, to get the Spirit back in my life, and that is not what's going on. That's your judgment of what you think about transgender people. And read my book and find out what really is happening, at least in my life. And maybe you realize that it's happening in a lot more people's lives. And, that we do have a testimony, and we do know who we are. We do know where we fit into the plan. And we are staying on the covenant path. There is a place for us in the church. And if you'll only let us.